Welcome to The Stream. I'm Ahmed Shihab-eldin. Asylum seekers in temporary accommodation in the UK are living in fear following a string of protests calling for their removal, with far-right groups exploiting local grievances to boost their own agenda. Today, we look at the abuse and intimidation that vulnerable people are experiencing and ask what can be done to keep them safe. Joining us today from London, Diane Taylor, a journalist at The Guardian who writes on human rights, racism, and civil liberties. Fiza Qureshi, Chief Executive Officer at Migrants' Right Network, an NGO advocating for migrants and refugees. She's in London. And Safia Khanrouf, a researcher at Hope Not Hate, who has examined far-right groups across Europe. Of course, you can also join today's discussion. Just send us your comments and questions through our live YouTube chat. Safia, I want to ask you, so many different angles here, so many things to discuss. What's the headline here for you based on your reporting?
So the research I would say I'm paying the most attention to right now is how it's escalating, how the number of, for example, far-right activists who go to hotels to harass asylum seekers have doubled between 2021 and 2022, so 102% increase. This kind of shows how important that part of their work is for far-right activists, and it really works. This is the thing that gives them views and helps them spread, tension into the local community. So, one of their tactics is going into a local community and spreading leaflets, with rumors about, not rumors, stereotypes and conspiracy theories about fighting age men coming for, to harm and kidnap your white girls, and that sort of rhetoric. So I would definitely say that's an important headline.
And as you were speaking there, we were looking at a map that showed just how much this has been proliferating and sort of spreading across the UK. We also have, there's the map, as you can see, I think in just a year, 100%, maybe 500% increase in certain areas. It's, how can you looking at this, just all those dots for our audience, this is not an isolated issue, right?
No, but we have to, as you said, keep it in context. So 102% increase, that's huge. That's the number, that's the increase of far-right activists going to these, asylum seeker accommodation, harassing staff, harassing the asylum seekers, pretending to be, local journalists or, trying all sorts of different methods.
Right.
But there are relatively few, in the grand scheme of things, there are relatively few people doing this. For example, a big increase in number is a woman named Amanda Smith who goes around doing this, and she visited 124 hotels in the last year. But these videos are then spread online in anti-migrant groups, far-right groups, and that's the part where there's, a huge amount of misinformation, rumors going on,
right.
And a small number of people impacting or having a much wider impact online.
And you also mentioned those leaflets. Diane, I want to share with our audience this one, for example. People are accusing the Tory party and these far-right extremist groups of kind of using the same language, if you will. Here saying stop the invasion, as you can see there in yellow, saying they must act now, calling for people to go protest. Of course, that language, stop the invasion, coming straight out of the mouth of certain politicians. I just want to ask you, Diane, reporting on this consistently as you have, how would you frame this in terms of the crossover between the far-right politicians and the media sort of inflaming this situation?
Well, certainly the current Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has been criticised of using inflammatory language such as the word invasion, referring to asylum seekers who arrive in the UK on small boats. As you say, that's the same language that the far right is using. Mm-hmm. But what we're not seeing from mainstream politicians is any very strong rebuttals of what the far right are doing, and that's concerning. the far right are certainly very active at the moment, but they have always been around. And what we need is for our mainstream politicians to put forward accurate, factual narratives, which put the numbers arriving into context and debunk the conflation of the certain issues that the far right keep continually put forward.
Right, and I want to talk about more what they're actually complaining about specifically. Before we do, though, Fiza, I'd be remiss not to ask you and to share with our audience sort of what it's like when these protests happen. So take a look at, just to give you a sense, really, of what it looks like. This is far-right protesters outside a hotel for asylum seekers in Knowsley, just outside of Liverpool. Take a look.
Here, mate. Absolutely loads. Big turnout. All on the main street. Thousands of them. God don't let you near it. They're all hiding inside. Proper good mob here.
If I'm not mistaken, Fiz, I see you're shaking your head there, but is this sentiment directed towards Muslims in particular? I mean, talk a little bit about the intersectionality of this phenomenon.
Yeah, I would say that that's been missing from the narratives as well, even from the migrant and refugee sector, really not understanding that those they're targeting, there's Islamophobia at play. You have the kind of ongoing anti-terrorism agenda that's being used, so you know, prevent in itself, and I think the majority of the people in some of these hotels are men. They're single men. They happen to be from Muslim majority countries, and so it's very easy for the far right to use a narrative of, as Safia already mentioned, like these are men coming over fighting men. But also there is an Islamophobic kind of narrative underlying that. I think what's really frightening, I'm shaking my head because I can't imagine being stuck inside a space where you've come to get safety and sanctuary, and then you're threatened on your doorstep again. And I was speaking to someone who's been supporting refugees in a coastal town, and she said the fear that they have, they're questioning why they've come to the UK now. Why come here when it's not safe for them to do so? Really uncertain, you know, times for them. And this is on top of them having to deal with issues like the earthquake in Syria, that they're also, you know, having to contemplate, well, I've got this happening here on my doorstep, and I've got to think about what's happening with my family and friends back home. So yeah, it's really worrying. As Diane said, like, there isn't that rebuttal. It's not coming from the government for sure, but it's also not really coming from the opposition, and that's really worrying when we don't have any really political parties or anyone really championing kind of refugees' rights. And challenging what the far right are doing.
Yeah, and I see, Safia, you want to jump in, but before you... Go ahead, actually, go ahead.
No, go ahead first.
No, please, you're here to impart your wisdom with us. Go ahead.
I don't know about the wisdom. This is just me saying Fiza is absolutely right. When it comes to, when she was talking about this fear that the asylum seekers are having in the hotels when these types of protests happen, I think communication is such an important part of this whole issue, or more like the lack of communication. So, you know, within the migration sector, it's very difficult because these are kind of new, uncertain times in terms of the rise of the far-right activity. The government obviously has to do a lot more in terms of safeguards and in terms of, you know, being very bad at communicating with, you know, the locals in the area, and this all kind of creates the situations we saw in that video.
Right, and there are so many more videos I want to get to, but Safia, I want to ask you as well, some of the comments coming in on YouTube from Peter Carson, for example, saying it's costing the UK taxpayer £35 million British pounds a week to house them in hotels. We have Gooders Pittman saying, are they really far right and fascist or simply concerned locals that have had enough of the illegal entries? What is your reaction to that, Fizza?
Really worrying that everyone again falls into the same trap and the same narratives, right? It's about absolutely, we don't feel that anyone should be housed. It's not a house. You're not being housed in a hotel. You're being accommodated. These aren't homes that they're creating. They're being forced to live there. They don't have control over where they get sent, how long they're going to be there, and for people to say, "Oh, are they really?" There is a mix of people being bussed into these towns to create these mobs. So the far right are mobilizing, and what they're doing is they are, as they've done historically, is mobilizing communities that are already disenfranchised.
Right. People who feel forgotten maybe by the UK, and particularly after Brexit. Sorry, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but in my mind, I'm wondering, does Brexit factor into this?
Absolutely. I mean, do you remember the posters that Nigel Farage was kind of standing next to, which was like streams of men, and they were brown and black men,
right?
And saying that this is what would happen if we continued to have freedom of movement. There's also the issue that we have that it's not racist to talk about immigration. Right, so that's why you can pick on refugees, because it's not racist to talk about refugee policies or talk about people in legal, illegal terms. But if you were doing this against racialized communities, then immediately the law kicks in. But with refugees, it seems to be that the easy scapegoats at the moment.
Safia, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I can't help but jump in again. Just about those comments, which I think are very important comments because they're comments that are being asked a lot online due to the way things have been framed within the media and within politics. But the locals have genuine concerns, and they're completely legitimate concerns based on the poor communication, how things have been carried out. Often suddenly asylum seekers are just being put into hotels. They have had little information about this happening, and it can be worrying, and all of that is very true. But that doesn't negate the fact that the far right are trying to exploit that, are trying to parachute into these communities, create and from that uncertainty, from those concerns, create tension and hate. And I mean, it just takes one person. I mean, in Dover in last October, we had Andrew Leake, who is the guy who threw petrol bombs at a migrant processing center. So he was consuming a huge amount of far-right material and anti-migrant activist material. Right. So it just takes one person in that kind of rhetoric.
And Sophia, please, but just if I may very quickly, I want to get someone else's voice in here who is one of those people we've been describing, who have those grievances, perhaps even legitimate concerns like many others, but it's again the way this is being communicated and sort of the misinformation. So let's take a listen to one angry local woman at Rotherham. Take a listen.
I have to live in my house in fear because I'd rather pay for them dirty, scummy to be in there than protect the English.
Why do you think they're dirty?
Why do I think they're dirty?
Yeah.
Look at where they've come from. They come here to get more money, to do what they want. They don't have to go to work. They get benefits. They get houses. They get nothing. And they look and stay what they're living in. They do it, the robbing, the kidnapping, the raping kids.
Kidnapping?
Yeah. They'll do anything to be sleeping with 11-year and 12-year-olds.
Now, Diana, I know, Safia, you want to jump in here, so we'll go to you and then to Diane because she hasn't spoken in a while. And I want to ask you, Diane, what you make of all that information that's being spewed and what the danger is there. But Sophia, sorry.
I will be very quick. I just want to say this video perfectly encapsulates the conspiracy theories and the type of rhetoric far-right anti-migrant activists are spreading online. I mean, the videos they share, trying to harass staff and asylum seekers, it's all about comparing it to the homeless people in the UK, comparing it to the cost of living crisis, saying, look, they're in 5-star hotels, look at those new bikes, who gave this to them? And then comparing it to how people are struggling, local British people. Yeah. So I just wanted to say that video was perfectly made the point.
And Diane, what do you think of that video?
Yeah, I mean, it's very concerning. No factual basis for what the woman was saying. There are two tropes that the far right are repeating over and over again at the moment. One is that asylum seekers are stealing the homes of British veterans who are forced to sleep on the streets because asylum seekers are stealing their homes. That's completely factually incorrect. Every British veteran has an entitlement to housing that asylum seekers don't have. The second factually incorrect point is about sexual abuse perpetrated by male asylum seekers against white British girls, usually girls who are under the age of 18. And we've seen repeated examples where supposed facts by the far right have been put out and have then collapsed and found to have no factual basis.
Well,
that happened in the case of Knowsley, where a rather strange video clip was circulated of allegedly a white schoolgirl being propositioned by an asylum seeker.
We actually have, if you want to look on my screen right here, this is on Twitter, as you can see, forgive me, this is, I think, the video that you're referring to, a young man in Knowsley outside the Suites Hotel approaching a 15-year-old girl. Again, these kinds of things are fodder for driving a lot of these mentalities. Obviously, it's not something that, I guess I don't want to get bogged down in this, and I don't want to just overshare all these videos that we have, but I do think it might be helpful for us to look at this one video from, I believe this is, the far-right group that we've been talking about at a Dunstable meeting. This is from Twitter, showing a member of the far-right group, Patriotic Alternative, sort of taking the mic and, at a meeting of local residents, kind of, sounding some alarms. Take a listen.
Now, don't take us for fools when you say that these people are refugees. We know they are illegal migrants. If these people were refugees, what are they fleeing from? It's very telling that we're never told what they are fleeing from. What wars are they fleeing from? What countries are they coming from? What are they fleeing? What persecution?
So Fizza, I'm curious, that line, I've heard it in the US, in the UK, all over the world, really. Well, are they really fleeing? And is there a war? I mean, even in our YouTube chat right here, take a look at this. Lion Jr. echoing some of what we heard from that far-right member, saying, who are these people, the immigrants? What country are they from mainly? And the UK's economy isn't good right now for many foreigners, sort of questioning why they're there and where they're coming from. What do you make of what the far-right member was trying to do there at that protest?
I mean, they're stereotyping, and they're basically trying to whip up hate, and they're trying to erase basically what the UK government has been involved in the past. We have a number of wars that we participated in: Afghanistan, Iraq. That's where people are coming from. Syria, where we've also been involved, not involved, for example. That's where people are fleeing from. We would also say people are fleeing from the legacy of colonialism and imperialism. This isn't a, the data is there. It's not difficult to find. The Home Office are very transparent about where people come from, and they have high acceptance rates from, I think, like Yemen, Syria, Eritrea, Afghanistan, and Libya. That's where people are coming from. I think what I wanted to really ask is, Safia mentioned, people have legitimate concerns in those small towns about people coming into those hotels. And I'd like to understand what those concerns are. Right. Because it very much mimics historically when brown and black people started moving into white majority areas, the fear-mongering and how white flight then, came about. And so what is the legitimate concern? Is it based on your racism? And
no, I appreciate you making that connection. I think too often things are conflated, or at least perceptions can dictate a person's reality. Too often we've seen that maybe get the better of a lot of people. And because we've been talking about the mainstreaming of sort of how can we put it, anti-brown and black or anti-immigrant sentiment. I do want to share a clip from January featuring someone who we're calling Hayat, or who is, it's not her real name, I should say. She's an asylum seeker from Eritrea, and she talks about the difficulties that she's encountered. Take a listen.
Every day, I stand up at the morning and I sit to the home in the hotel. I sit all the day, nothing to do, nothing. No school, no home, no work, no anything. Sometimes I see in my phone, in the Facebook or in YouTube, I see the news, and that's is not good for the refugee or the people, or for me, not good.
Sophia, what can be done? I mean, what should be prioritized by the government, by others in the country to actually protect not just asylum seekers, but sort of try to limit and contain a lot of this hate speech?
So I feel some of the things have been touched upon already, but generally language is very important. So as we talked about the Home Secretary using the word invasion to talk about asylum seekers and migrants, this is, the type of language we see within the far right. So there's this inflammatory language that's being used within sections of, the politicians, in the media. That's definitely something that needs to drastically improve in how we discuss this issue, because it is an issue that the country seems very interested in.
And Sophia, I have to ask also, looking at these sort of headlines, Keir Starmer says there's a case for GPS tagging on some asylum seekers. Of course, I know a coalition of charities warned that this policy would amount to psychological torture. But just the fact that this is where the conversation is, Fizza, what do you think is missing here? I mean, is the government and police forces, are they taking the far-right threat seriously? And when you see these sort of considerations of tagging people, what does it tell you about how they're trying to approach this problem?
At the moment, it tells me that there's the only people really championing migrant and refugees' rights are those in the third sector or some, members of the public. It doesn't really feel like the opposition understand the implications and the impact. Some of their suggestions have, like, as you said, tagging is an appalling, it's almost like a criminalization of migration, of seeking refugee and status and protection. And surely we're asking people to come here to seek sanctuary, not penalize them for having chosen the UK for that. I want to just echo, like Sophia, she said, the language has to be challenged. And I mean, I'm going to plug our Words Matter campaign, which is doing exactly this. We're unpicking all the language that we have as in our migration narratives, and debunking those, offering alternatives. And what we need is really the opposition and politicians to take that seriously and think about the consequences of their words, really. Those words really do matter. And again, as Safia pointed out, the attack, or I think Diane did, the attack in the immigration detention centre was a key example of how as soon as you say and ramp up hate and the rhetoric, it has a consequence and an action, and it could be deadly.
Most certainly.
Can I just jump in again?
We're running out of time, so in 30 seconds, please, go ahead.
I'll take less, hopefully. Just when we're talking about language and who says what, it'd be interesting to point out just a bit of context for the man who was speaking in the Patriotic Alternative clip in the church. I mean, Patriotic Alternative is a far-right, small but fascist group. I mean, its leader, Sam Collett, has praised Hitler and, I've supported him. So we're talking about extreme, and yet they've managed through these protests to kind of present themselves as protectors of the locals, and, we just care about our own people. So it's very important we make sure we know who is saying what.
It is important, and it is important so that we will continue to cover this story. And I want to thank you. Fortunately, that's all the time we have for today's show. But Sophia, Diane, and Fizza, thank you so much for being with us. You can always find us online at stream.aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching.